What would be super helpful to me tonight, just for context and understanding a little bit who we have in the room, if you were to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of experience, knowledge level of functional medicine, let's assume that 1 is kind of heard about it, came here willingly, I'm open-minded, but I don't know a lot. I guess a 0 would be the person next to me dragged me here. So maybe you don't even register on the scale. A 10 would be, I actually don't know who you are because I could teach the class. I've been studying up on this stuff for decades. That would be our 10. Where do you find yourself tonight on that scale? Just shout out some numbers. 1.
8.
8. Almost ready to trade places, but because public speaking is everyone's favorite thing, we're going to stay right there. Fair enough. What? Are there anybody else? 4. 5. Okay.
Yeah, 5 or 6.
Yeah, what's been interesting is the longer that, 1, we've been here, 2, we've been doing this class, our numbers continue to actually decrease. I used to hear 7, 8s, and 9s all the time as though you were all sort of waiting for us, and I finally know about you because we've been here a long time. But I finally know about you, and then now people are, being referred through friends or finding us on the internet or on social media, and so we're getting a little bit of a different audience, and I feel like for me that's helpful because it helps guide the level of detail, helps me not make assumptions about what you may or may not know.
If you would ask me like a year ago, I'd probably been like 7. But as soon as I started looking at this, I'm like 1, 2, 3.
There's a lot more to know than I thought there was.
Yeah.
That's also a fair point. Absolutely. So the goal of tonight is really twofold. 1 is to talk a little bit about that. What is functional medicine? How is it different? Because it is in fact what we do here exclusively. So there are some providers in the community where if you drive up to their office, and these are amazing people, they do good work, but they have functional medicine listed as sort of one of 8 things that they do. So we're one of 2 exclusively functional medicine clinics in the state of Iowa at this point, but it is a somewhat growing number. We're starting to see people incorporate this into their practice or even flip over their practice to a functional medicine practice. And so that gives you a little bit of insight about what makes us unique or different, because I feel like when it's all you do, just by virtue of that, you will see a lot more cases, and in 15 years we've certainly been exposed to a lot of different questions and things that people are working through in our community. So we will talk about what is it and how is it different from what we call reactive care. We do not prefer the words traditional and alternative medicine here, because if you work here, if this is your healthcare philosophy, then everything else is alternative. So you will hear me use language proactive and reactive. Reactive would be, as we're going to more clearly define, the care that happens in the community around us. And we'll talk about proactive care being what the bucket that functional medicine is in. The second important topic about tonight is how we do what we do. So my role here really is patient experience. And one of the things that I have learned over time is the more you know in advance, the happier that you're going to be. So the more you know, this is how often I'm going to be here, this is what's going to happen to me while I'm here, this is how much this is going to cost, this is the way that I can prepare for this, that creates a really good experience for people and a successful one. So we have, through lots of feedback from people just like you over time, continued to refine this experience to create that for you, to make sure that you have what you need before you decide or not to become a patient of ours. So in addition to those 2 key buckets, as you made your way here in the cold and dark and traffic, what were you hoping that we would cover so that when you leave here at 6 something, that you would be able to look back and say, that was a good use of my time. I'm really glad that I came. What would you need to know?
I don't know if there's anything specific, just to learn about it.
And sometimes the ones on Tuesday, honestly, I don't even know what to ask. So that's also fair.
I'm pretty sure I want to be a patient and it was required.
Yeah, we do get that. No, I appreciate that too, but I think it's also appropriate to talk about why that is.
Yeah.
And as we have measured kind of patient satisfaction and attendance, because it used to be optional. And as we measured what we would call success and not. We found a 100% correlation between what I know going in and how important that is ultimately to your experience here. So there you
As
go.
long as you answered all the points you said before.
I'm good. I'm happy. Very good. Well, then I feel like I'm equipped then with the right content tonight. All right, let me start with a few slides that I just like to call the state of the state. And for the eights, you'll nod your head and you'll go, of course, I already knew this. But some of you, this might give you some things, some points to ponder. We, in our country, in the United States, spend more on healthcare than any other industrialized nation. Yet we rank 37th in the world, according to the World Health Organization, in quality of care. We spend a lot of money. 50% of bankruptcy filings happen actually as a result of medical expenses. And our health insurance premiums are rising at a rate 3 times more quickly than average wage.
That might be just.
Final goal a little bit different. Half of us take 1 or more prescription medications on a daily basis. So short story here, we spend a lot of money. It causes stress on families. And those margins in household budgets are becoming increasingly compressed because that ratio is getting increasingly off kilter. Now, whether you're a 1 or an 8 on the scale, any guesses why I would say or more, or maybe even should bold those words in the last bullet? Why might or more actually be more common than just taking 1 prescription?
Once you start taking one, they
Yes.
just keep adding for symptoms.
Right, for side effects of the initial one. And so what we find is that some number of you are here because at some point you've sort of started thinking, maybe this whole business of a pill for an ill may not be the best solution. Because now I take this and I have headaches. So now I have to take something for the headache. Or I take this and now I can't sleep. So now I have to take something in order to be able to sleep. Or I take something and now I'm chronically constipated. And I don't need to go into a lot of detail about why that is neither comfortable nor healthy. And so we have to do something about that. And so very often,
Okay, yeah, because I see that.
what draws people here is this
Yeah, I saw that one.
this idea one day, this sort of, I don't know if this is really the right solution or a long-term one. It seems to me, as a future image in a slide will show, we're just continuing to put a Band-Aid on something that probably is a lot more serious. Now, I want to take a minute to say that there is a place in the world for reactive care. If I am one of those people on the 5-car pileup this morning, and something happens to me where I have an artery, I'm bleeding out, or something is, I don't bring me back here. That's not what we do. We don't do urgent and emergent care here. What proactive care, what functional medicine does well is chronic illness. And that is a place where we would say in reactive medicine, we have lost our way, that we do not have a good solution in reactive care. And so what often draws people here are chronic concerns, which would be a big bucket would be autoimmune disease. And some of you probably know there are more than 160 named autoimmune diseases today. Some of you may have a diagnosis that falls into one of those categories. And that is a bucket of people for whom our reactive care system does a disservice, a great disservice, and people who find a place here of healing and ultimately a path towards wellness. The others of you, or the other common bucket I would say, are the people that say, you know what, I've been traipsing around town, I've been all kinds of places, even Mayo, and everybody tells me they don't know really quite what is wrong with me. I don't actually have a diagnosis because either people tell me I'm normal. I was having dinner drinks last night with a friend, and she said, I have been to several people and they keep saying things like, well, you are in your 40s. That means I associate with people much older, of course, than I am. But at some point you start to recognize that just because it's normal for everybody else does not mean that it has to be okay. And so there's just this, she keeps saying, I know there's something. I know that there's something I need to figure out. But everybody else tells me there really isn't anything to figure out. So many people are just trusting that intuition and trusting that gut instinct that's, no pun intended, by the way, that says, this is not the way that I should be feeling at this time and place in my life. So perhaps you fall into one of those buckets like many of our patients do. Now here's some other interesting information. This is what's been happening to food and nutrition over the last decade or so. At this point, 1 out of every 4 Americans eat fast food every single day. French fries are officially the most commonly eaten vegetable. We eat out 40% of our meals, 20% of those are consumed in our vehicles, and many of those come out of boxes. 31% more processed food that we eat in the United States today over fresh food. Now, before I talk about why I believe this is, and I think some of that is experiential, I am often reminded of a class just like this where somebody came up to me and said, I've been thinking about something, and I said, okay. And he goes, what do you think, how do you think people would behave if when they got their first vehicle, they were told this is the only one you will ever get? How do you think they would treat it? This is not rhetorical. What do you think?
It would be even better.
They certainly wouldn't be eating French fries in it. It would be garage kept, as they say in the South where I'm from, spit shined. I mean, there would be no showing up at the dealership saying, well, it's 6,500 highway miles. We would be on it with our maintenance. What's interesting is that every single person in the room, and I'm guessing even the little nugget, knows that this is the only one of these we will ever get. Yet as we look at some of this information, we very quickly are reminded that we do not take as good care of this vehicle as we would an actual car, even though we know it's the only one we're going to get. Now I want to acknowledge something too, because I live in the same world you live in. A lot of this is a product of busyness, which is officially the new fine. I used to see people that I hadn't seen in a while, and I would say, how are you? And they would say, I'm fine, I'm good, how are you? And now, what do they say? Busy. And it's like a full body, busy. Like a whole body reaction. And my response, I have one now. I say, well, I guess it's better than the alternative. Now, I'm not sure, because I work here and I see what that creates. I know what it does to me. Confessions, one of the things I don't do well is sleep enough. Anybody with me? I mean, I like to do. I like to talk, which is probably why they put me up here. And I enjoy, to some extent, participating, and I like being on boards, and I like the fact that somehow, some way, I became the 3rd grade homeroom mom, and I have no idea why, or how, really. I enjoy that, but I also get that this is why we just got to get to dance by 6 o'clock. We just got to get to the concert. We just got to get someplace, and sometimes that requires something fast. If a bulletproof coffee or a smoothie counts, I am firmly planted in eating breakfast almost every day in my car. So I absolutely understand why that is. We have an opportunity, though, to decide what's important here. And how do we find a balance between fueling this very premium machine? It's like, I don't know, you pick a Bugatti or Maserati, something really fancy. It is that, yet we do not fuel it the way that we should. Food, by the way, doesn't have ingredients. Food is an ingredient, and so you're saying, well, what's in here? If you have to ask that question, or if there are things you can't read, it might not be food at all. And so when you put that kind of business into your body, it sort of goes, whoa, I don't know what to do with this. And then over time, very simply, bad things happen. My very medical explanations for things. So how's all this working? Well, you tell me, every year 12 million adults who seek outpatient care are actually misdiagnosed. 1 out of every 3 kids born today will, not might, but will, develop diabetes over their lifespan. 60% of us are overweight or obese, according to BMI percentage, and 60% of Americans admit we get very little, if any, exercise. 1 or 8 on the scale, I think we would all agree that this is probably not a formula for success. And what's also interesting is as you study, as you research this stuff, you will find that the more that our nutrition has deteriorated in this country, the more we spent on medical expenses and the sicker people have become. And so it becomes absolutely undeniable that there might be a correlation between what we feed the machine and how the machine behaves. And that is what a lot of functional medicine is about. So for those of you just sort of needing a working definition, right? If somebody says to you, so you went to the Livewell clinic the other night, what do they do there? This is something you could say. So functional medicine is personalized medicine. It deals primarily with prevention and underlying cause, root cause instead of symptoms for serious chronic disease. And our primary tools in the toolkit are nutrition and medical grade supplementation, and that happens here in a number of different ways. So I would say the tools in the toolkit in reactive care are pills and surgery, and I think we would mostly agree with that. And our tools are these. Now, the supplements here, though, they might be in capsules and liquids and powders, but they are also introduced to patients, introduced to the body intravenously. So as you have an opportunity to walk around a little bit later, you will see that in the far, I believe this is east side, I have other strengths, that there we have an IV therapy bay with a number of IV chairs back there, and it is part of many of our patients' protocol. Now, I had a little sidebar earlier with one of you, and I mean, I get that in non-urgent, non-emergent situations, sometimes to people, IV therapy feels a little bit creepy. And I get it. I was one of those people. I actually work here, have my blood drawn frequently, have IV therapy almost every month, and I didn't like needles when I started here. I would rather go skydiving than have my blood drawn. That's me. And now it's completely normal. It doesn't bother me at all, and I have many personal stories I could tell you about the impact that it has made on my overall wellness and my immune system. So there is no question in my mind personally that that can have significant impact on your protocol and on your plan of care. So let me just quickly go over kind of a comparison between functional medicine, proactive care, and reactive care to just kind of cement that difference for a little bit. So in a symptom-based system, you go to the doctor, you have a thing. You have a pain, something's not quite right, you take something, but then eventually you ask yourself, is the problem solved? Because now I have other symptoms, so I have to take more stuff, and very often, I would say at least once a week, and that's about how frequently we have these sessions. Someone will say to me, you know what, Christina, I started to investigate this about 2 years ago, as an example. And I have been to doctors all over this community. I've been to Mayo, and I'm here to tell you at the end of all that time and money and prescriptions, I feel worse and not better. And I wish that I could go back to the way that I felt before I started bouncing around all over town seeing specialists of all descriptions. So we hear that story a lot. And those individuals are simply asking themselves, okay, rather than just help me manage symptoms, isn't there an opportunity to look at what caused all of this in the first place? And as I'm going to talk about in a little bit, gut health is at the core of most of what ails people. And that is not in an effort to oversimplify anything. I'm going to talk to you about why that's true in a little bit. But we talk a lot about gut health because you've probably heard it called the second brain, all kinds of other things. By the way, how many of you have heard of leaky gut or intestinal permeability? Isn't that interesting? I'm a 1, I'm a 2, I'm a 3. Leaky gut, everybody. So maybe you know more than you think you know. It's very interesting how some of the things are becoming common language, but they're not necessarily linked to functional medicine. So I'll give you I feel like what's a really simple example of this. How many of you have ever had a headache? Yeah, 100%. Even the little one. Yeah. And so what do people do generally? Maybe it's not you, but generally when they have a headache. Pop a pill. And we have choices, right? I would say you go to
choices.
CVS, Walgreens, the hotel lobby, inside my sister's purse. Lots of options. And we take something and we wait. She's going to see this on YouTube one day and go, I can't believe you're talking about me like that. But it's true. So we're safe. But people wait, I don't know, 10 minutes. And then they're tapping their foot, looking on the back. How many of these could I safely take in a 24-hour period? Because I have stuff. I'm busy. And very few people, those of you that are more familiar with functional medicine might find yourself in the category that would ask themselves, heck, rather than just trying to get rid of my headache, why wouldn't I try to figure out why the headaches keep happening in the first place? Dehydration, higher low blood pressure, higher low blood sugar, stress, lack of sleep. All of those things are simple to say, not always simple to fix. All of those things very commonly cause headaches, and very few people say, I probably should have drank more water today. And rather, we're looking for that 10-minute solution. Good job out of you, by the way. That was like a cue. I looked up and he took a big old swig of water. Now, in functional medicine, we emphasize root cause-based care. So what we would be trying to figure out here is why you get the headaches, and then eliminate that so that the headaches never come back. Why you chronically get a rash, why your belly aches every single day, why your hormones are out of whack, why you're tired all the time, why your joints hurt, why your thyroid is acting crazy. We're going to figure out why that's happening in the first place instead of just trying to help you manage the symptom of that. It still often starts with a health problem. I wish that this was the first stop. It very often is a place during the path of searching out something that will work. We like that we're a place of hope for people. We know we're a place that works when other things don't. But it is interesting too, where people very often will say to me, I've been everywhere else, so here I am. Yes. And I'm thinking, well, we'll take it. But if you come 8 years ago, maybe it will be a little easier to fix. But that's all right. This is what I do. I tell my story anywhere people will let me. So let me know if you have such a place, because I would like people to come sooner. And we're going to talk about this in a fair amount of detail in a little bit. But here, what people really like is, instead of just, I have my appointment, I have a prescription, and then come back and check in with me in 6 months. There's a plan. And we talk about a couple of different types of care plans here. The primary one we're going to talk about tonight is called a restorative care plan. So that is a care plan that's customized, that's structured for you based on your needs and what you're struggling with, what's going on with you. Every now and then you'll also hear us talk about things like foundational care plans. There's pediatric care plans. So there are some other things. I think it's easier for me to speak more in broader, more general terms, and then answer those individual questions later. So I'll try to kind of stick to the main thing, but we have some ways that you can deviate from the path when it's appropriate. Our plans of care here, on average, are 6 to 9 months in length, and include things like testing and labs, include things like nutrition consults, nutrition recommendations, food sensitivity testing. We do not subscribe actually to any one way of eating. So people will say, well, are you guys like Whole30 people? Are you paleo people? Are you AIP people? Are you keto people? And they want to put us in a bucket of people. There are lots of people who eat a paleo diet for a long time and then find out they're sensitive to almonds. Well, if you've done that, you realize that almonds are pretty common as a snack, and we replace peanut butter with almond butter, and they we drink almond milk. And then one day we realized, heck, this healthy thing I was doing actually wasn't right for me. And so it's really important that we understand not only broadly what's healthy, which, by the way, we would say is far different from the traditional food pyramid, but even within that, there's just what your body needs, which is important to know. And then supplements will likely be a part of it. IV therapy might fall into this for some of you. And then reevaluation, I would say, is a really important component. So I have had more than one person say, you know, I went to a place like this, Colorado, Arizona, somewhere, Florida, cutting edge states, I guess, in functional medicine. And they'll say to me, I had all of this testing. And they gave me all these supplements, and 2 years later, I'm still taking all of them, and I have no idea if it works. And I say to that, very bad plan. Check in, are we on the right path? And if not, why not? And rechart the course and adjust. And why do you still have a hard time giving up your bagel and cream cheese or whatever the thing is for you? Let's talk through that. And a whole team of people here to help you unpack that. Okay, let me just black this out for a second and ask, how are we doing on the difference between functional medicine and the rest of medicine? Pretty good baseline? Okay, awesome. So now let's move into kind of what we do and what that looks like. There's a quote at the top here by a guy by the name of Hippocrates. His very contemporary image is on the right-hand side. The point in that is he's not a living guy. Yet a long time ago he said, all disease begins in the gut. So the other thing that's interesting to know about functional medicine is it's not new. But it is something that we has, I don't know, globally I would say have gotten away from. There are all kinds of reasons why that is. Because of convenience and because of, efficiency, perceived, so anyway. But what is actually true is that 70% of our overall immunity, our immune system, our wellness, lives here. The microbiome, the gut, the digestive tract, whatever fancy set of words that you choose to use. Which is why most of you that become patients here will have an opportunity to see exactly how healthy your gut is. The single most common test other than blood work that we do here is stool analysis. Because there's nothing else that can tell you more about what's going on in your gut than what comes out. And so just prepare yourselves for that as a possibility. Now let me also tell you why that's true. This schematic represents digestive health and all of the things that the sort of cause and effect system within it. So on the top line, there's a series of things that we're labeling triggers. And those include things like stress, toxins, food particles, pathogens, infections, inflammation, drugs is the one I forgot. So I'm sure we can skip this slide because nobody in the room is ever susceptible to any of those things, right? Frankly, these are things that, even if I would say we live in a bubble, it'd be hard. And there are patients who make themselves almost crazy trying. They're growing their own food, they're never eating out, they're drinking water, they're purifying it at home, they're cleaning with vinegar, and yet, you take one walk down the street, or your kids go to school a day or two, or camp, or a movie, and we are then in front of, around, germs, infections. I've been jokingly saying, this year it took about 20 minutes for kids to start getting sick this school year. It was crazy. And it's just part of living in the big wide world. So our bodies are in fact under attack every day, all day, from one of these things. Now food, that one deserves a little extra attention and maybe even some clarification. So food particles can really be a trigger in one of two ways. One, as I alluded to before, you're eating things that your body doesn't like and you may or may not know it. So if you have a food allergy, you probably know. Because you probably carry an EpiPen and you know what it is. Tree nuts, peanuts, whatever it is. And however, here what we talk about is food sensitivity, which is a delayed reaction. So some people will say, well, I don't know why this bothers me now. I've been eating it for years. Well, if you think of that reaction building up over time, it means it's been bothering you for a while, but now's the time. Now is the time that it's showing up and affecting you. Now, food particles as a trigger can also be situations where the digestive system, the digestive tract is just not functioning properly. So people with irritable bowel, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, I mean, you know individuals, I'm certain, that struggle on some level with all of this chronic constipation. We routinely have children in here because that's the only way, they think anyway, that they can keep their children regular. Well, after a while, if you do some research, you realize that's poison. And it isn't just because you can take it, or somebody say, well, I just put it in my coffee every day and then I eat whatever I want. And I just, when we hear things like that, we just sort of, I have to take a deep breath and I have to just realize that we are a product of our own education. We know what we know, so there's no judgment. But I think it helps me realize how much misinformation is still floating around right now about a lot of this stuff. Now, if you move your eyeballs down a little below halfway, this middle section actually represents the inside of your gut. And this little line here that looks like a bunch of aliens always reminds me of the movie Home, and I don't know why. Anybody know that movie? And what happens is all of that, the little aliens, that line represents a mucosal lining that we should all have in our gut. And when it functions properly, its entire role is to basically keep the bad guys in. So as we eat, our body uses what it needs as fuel, provided we give it fuel. I tell my kids, Skittles are not food. Your body has no idea what to do with those. So provided it is actually food, your body will use what it needs as fuel, and then the waste will stay in there and then be eliminated, one way out, one way in. That's the goal. Ideally, that's what it looks like. But these guys, these triggers, attack this lining constantly, every day, all day. And so over time, what happens, that mucosal lining thins and eventually is compromised. This is not like, and that's, by the way, what leaky gut and intestinal permeability is. It is not a gaping hole. It's not a gash. There's not things just pouring through it. It's more akin to cheesecloth or a sponge, an oozing, which is to me a very gross word. But now you can imagine all this toxic stuff now seeping out into the rest of your body, where it has no business being and wreaking havoc. So now you have toxins in your bloodstream. So if you think about it that way, you're thinking, oh, well, now it makes sense why a rash might be linked to my gut. It makes sense why joint pain might be linked to my gut. It makes sense why migraines might be linked to my gut, or ADD, or ADHD, or some of the other things that we see come in here. Because when this happens, when the bad guys get out, ultimately it creates very systemic inflammation, and everything we do really is addressing inflammation. When you have inflammation, your body is, quite frankly, doing its job. Inflammation is your body's way of fighting off the bad guys. But when that system is in overdrive all the time, we got to figure out what's causing the fire in order to keep the fire out and not having it continue to burn. Now let's talk a little bit then about what that path, what that solution or that journey looks like here as a patient. I like this visual of a road. I feel like then it implies a destination, which is pretty awesome. There's a goal there. And along this path, there are milestones we talk about, and then our restorative care plans and other care plans kind of fit within these markers. So firstly, we start this whole thing with a period of discovery, and that really means two different things. One, you came here to discover what the heck the Livewell Clinic is about. So that's part of the discovery. Does this make sense? Am I the only person that comes tonight? There are other people. That makes me feel good. And I get that that's what happens. People are sort of sizing things up the second they're in here. And I appreciate that. Does this place feel comfortable? Do these people seem like they know what they're talking about? You will have an opportunity to meet the staff. Whichever ones are here on shift tonight will be happy to answer your questions. So we have at least one nurse here. I think it's Amy tonight. Melissa will be at the front helping you guys if you want to book an appointment. Bobby is in and out. I think he might still be here. He's our Director of Patient Services. He's also your money guy, so I'm going to cover that at a high level, but if you have more specific questions, he's a great resource. And so there's our health coach is very often here later. Her name is Melissa. So there's lots of people you can talk to and ask questions, and every single one of them has a personal story that led them here in some way. Because I always say we could all be working elsewhere, but we're not, because what we do here is important and it changes lives. So that's the first part of the discovery. What is the Livewell Clinic and what's going on there? We, by the way, have overall our team of 2 doctors, we have 4 registered nurses, we have 1 health coach, we have director of operations, director of patient services, me, a couple people at the front desk, and a partridge in a pear tree. I don't know. I think that's everybody, about 11, 12 people. The next part of the discovery is figuring out what's going on with you medically. Now, if you're in this room, you find yourself in a couple of different buckets. You might be the person that if you went home right now, you could pull out a giant file folder filled with labs because you have been poked and prodded and tested. A guy was here 6 weeks ago, maybe, probably not even that long, and I have never heard his diagnosis. It was a very long, every letter of the alphabet sort of thing. And he literally said to me, I am everybody's guinea pig. People are saying to me, I don't know what you have. Super rare, not acting like we think it should act. You mind if we just kind of try stuff out? I think he's used to it now, but really he would like something a little more concrete. So that might be your story, and I'm telling you that because we do have some options for those of you that if you went back in 6 months, let's say, you'd have a fair amount of labs and a fair amount of blood work. So as I talk about restorative care plan and pricing, we do have an opportunity to potentially consider some of that information as long as you have it here a week in advance and as long as it's newer than what I've just described. So 6 months for everything else and 90 days for blood. Because the discovery period here mostly starts with blood work. So we have a comprehensive blood panel. We call it the Livewell panel, the functional wellness panel. You'll hear it referred to a couple of different ways. And it will create essentially your narrative or your baseline for your care here. It does not have food sensitivity. It's got some indicators that indicate probable gut dysfunction, but it is not a gut test. It is here's where you're at right now. It's a panel, so it's 22 different tests, 65 different markers. It is important to know that in functional medicine, we seldom, if ever, draw only one marker. Why? Because our body has this amazing ability to compensate for something else not going well. And so you may draw vitamin D levels or vitamin B levels or just iron or just thyroid or, tell me some of the ones. You guys can probably listen just as easily as me because you're here. And when you just have those individual markers drawn, you don't have the whole story. So a blood panel is going to say, as this is moving and shaking over here, look what's also happening behind the curtain. This is where the impact is, and particularly as it relates to things like cortisol. Our body has amazing ways of helping us function until one day it can't. Until one day it just has had enough. And so that's when, wow, a diagnosis, and yesterday I was on nothing, and today I have a pill I have to take every single day for the rest of my life. Like, how does that happen? Because it creeps up on you. We've been talking about, what do people want? What do we want people to know in 2019? And it's so simple, but this is what it boils down to. What you don't know can hurt you. What's brewing under there, you're completely asymptomatic, you're normal, according to everybody else. If we don't know what to watch for, one day down the line you'll say, where did this come from? And that's what we do. We help you prevent that moment. Where did this come from? And if you already know it came, and then we help you unravel that and reverse it. So initial blood panel 449, so you can write that number down. All of our lab work is inclusive of the office visit that goes with. So when you come back and visit with Dr. Zach or Dr. Lurie, that office visit is included in that price. And that's pretty important since clinical time these days is about $300 an hour. So you can kind of tell how much of it is doctor's time and how much of it is lab. So from that, I always liken this to like a decision tree. You decided to come here and then you decide to invest $449 to see what we're going to say and how different it feels from what you've heard from other people. especially those of you that may come here as a skeptic, that may come here thinking, well, nobody else can help me, why can you? That investment is really important because people say to me all the time, right away I could tell, that the information I was hearing and the way that the clinical team was looking at things was different. So that makes them willing to continue that investment. If it wasn't going to be different, why would you do that? So $449 initial investment. So then imagine you come in, you fill out your medical history, we review that with you during our intake process, and a clinical person, a doctor, is now going to, based on that blood, directionally say, okay, probable food sensitivity, possible autoimmune concerns, probable metabolic syndrome. I see all kinds of possible and probables in the notes. So phase next is to find out with certainty. So that's where your restorative care plan comes in. So in a plan of care, and this is without outside labs being considered, and I will talk about that kind of as a sidebar just in case that, anybody, by the way, if you're willing to say, feel like that applies to you, like maybe you have a lot of stuff already you could bring, a couple of you, okay. So I will go into more detail about that. So those of you that start with a blood panel and are not in that bucket, what will happen is Dr. Lurie will visit with you, for example, and go over all of the information and then type in there the labs you would like to see. And then you will visit with Bobby, and Bobby will say, okay, based on what Dr. Lurie would like to see, these are the tests that you're being prescribed, essentially. So those might be autoimmune panels, leaky gut testing, food sensitivity testing, stool analysis, heavy metals, organic acid. I don't know, you guys tell me something. I'll tell you if we do them.
Do you look for parasites?
We do. So our stool analysis is also a panel, and it has yeast, parasites, infections, inflammations, good and bad bacteria. Yes. I don't know, whatever's in there. Yes, a lot of them. They're all in there. Don't ever go on a cruise before your repeat panel, by the way. Dr. Lurie said to me, didn't you feel bad? Wow. There's a lot of creepy stuff on cruise ships, and I still love it. I'll still go, by the way. But all those triggers that I was talking about, they just made their way right in. Awesome. So I digress. I apologize. But I just want you to know that it's relevant. We experience the same stuff as people that work here and live and breathe with us all the time. So in that plan of care, 3 to 5 additional tests, usually also a couple of those re-evaluation moments. So we'll redraw the panel, see how you're doing. Potentially a recommendation for intravenous therapy. You nodded pretty vehemently when I started talking about IV therapy. Anybody else know we did that or come here with particular interest in that? Okay. So a lot of our infusions are heavy on vitamin C, and then they're customized beyond that for the needs of the patient. And there's been a lot of research, for example, around the effectiveness of vitamin C in cancer. And so more than likely, when you're back in the IV therapy bay, you will find yourself surrounded by a patient or more that is also pursuing very high dose vitamin C treatment for cancer, either as adjunctive care, where they are also having chemo and radiation on those alternate days, or who have said no thank you to those more, I am going to use the word traditional means, and electing to do something entirely different. And by the way, all of those things are okay with us. We partner with oncologists all over the community. So vitamin C anywhere from 12.5 grams to 100 grams in an infusion. And to give you some perspective, if you take a couple of capsules of vitamin C on a daily basis, you're probably taking 1 gram or 1,000 milligrams. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of the quantities that we're talking about. So supplements, IV therapy, health coaching. She's been wandering around. I think she's mostly in black today, but Melissa is our health coach, and she is for people an accountability partner, a meal planner, a cheerleader, a listening ear when something feels hard or if it feels like it's taking too long. I mean, I talked about 9 months, you guys. I did not talk about 3 weeks. It takes time to unravel, for some of you, decades of stuff that's been going on. And so we want to really make sure that you have a proper expectation. I have people say, oh, I haven't felt well a day in 22 years. And then those same people are the ones calling me after 3 weeks and saying, I thought I'd feel better. When am I going to feel better? So we have to patch the holes, we have to spackle the leaks, and then we have to rebuild. And sometimes, actually, symptoms are good. Sometimes when we feel poorly, it means things are happening, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I've been here maybe 3 weeks, and I took a phone call that was like that. Like, oh, I feel terrible, and it's all about this thing you have me taking, and I feel worse, and what's this all about? And I kind of went back to Dr. Zach's office with the phone like this and explained the scenario, and I said, she really feels pretty bad. And he goes, good. And I remember thinking, oh, do you want to come to her? Like, today I would be prepared for that, and I would be able to explain why that is. But that detox process can be pretty significant for people. But the good news is it's temporary, and the solutions are permanent. So that restorative plan of care, on average, is about $6,500. So that's 6 to 9 months, all of those things. So before I talk about foundational care and the people with all the labs, let me just stick there for a little bit. Pediatric is not $6,500. So pediatric is more in the neighborhood of $2,500, more compressed timelines. Couple of very simple reasons why that is. One, all the tests aren't able to be administered. I was going to say executed, that didn't sound good. Administered on little people. And also the good news is when parents bring their children early, they get better fast because they haven't had as long for their health to deteriorate. So there usually is a correlation between age and actually how well people get and how quickly. Now the other big factor is compliance. So maybe even the most frustrating thing about what we see is I cannot be at your house at night with a fork and the right stuff on it, making sure you're eating well, making sure you're taking your supplements, making sure you're not, oh, I'm having my blood drawn and I better be good for the next week. I mean, this is just about being real and saying, okay, this is what I have a hard time giving up. This is where I've struggled the most. This is why I can't seem to do better with nutrition. Now, if you are, yes?
What is pediatrics for you? Age?
Technically it's 18 and under. Here, by definition, it's probably 16. Then we have we have a 14-year-old having IV therapy. So I meet 14-year-olds that look 20, and I meet 20-year-olds that look 14. So to some extent, it's medical experience, how often people have had blood drawn, if at all. Some of that plays in. It's the nurses and the clinical team's judgment call to decide what bucket they put people in if they're on the bubble, so to speak. If it's a pretty grown up teenager person, it's probably going to be pretty close to what we would be able to do for an adult. So let's stick with that and talk about payments and what we have available for all of this stuff. We do not file insurance, and it's not because we don't want to, it's because they don't generally pay for what we do. So we would have extra people and extra overhead and not a lot of output, not a lot of income related to that. So it doesn't make sense to do it. However, all of your invoices will have CPT codes and diagnostic codes should you choose to file those on your own as self-pay claims. Occasionally, I hear people have things paid. It doesn't seem to have anything at all to do with the provider, but rather persistence. So that's the one common theme that I hear. Most often, people have blood work covered and they have maybe stool testing covered. They seldom, if ever, have food sensitivity testing covered or IV therapy covered. So there are some pretty distinct buckets, I feel like, where reimbursements happen if they're going to at all. So outside of insurance, payment plans. So that is Bobby sitting down with someone and saying, okay, what does this look like? What can you do? How will this work? Our goal, I will tell you, is to make this possible for as many people as possible. Recognizing that I can't give you a money tree. We really do want to sit down and have a conversation and say, if not this, then what? And if not now, then when? And how can we adjust timing or services or things in order to make something possible which is better than what is happening today, obviously. if there's anybody in the room that, and you don't have to confess this, it's like, I still drive through the McDonald's drive-thru every single day. Like the idea that I'm gonna change my diet, never eat gluten, dairy, or soy, stay away from refined sugar, and so on and so on and so on, it's overwhelming to me. We have, I call it, it's a toddler, it's a baby step. It's called a foundational care plan. That's very much in just working on food and providing the support that you need to get through that step before you start to get into some of the more complicated things that we do. So we have that. And then for those of you that have reams of paper represented at home with lab work, we would recommend that you just schedule an initial consult. Those are $299. You are required to have all your labs submitted 1 week in advance of your appointment, because some people bring these in a suitcase or a box. And so it takes time for our clinical team to get through that. And you will still be presented with a restorative care plan, but as much as we are able, based on the information you have, we'll adjust that care plan to take into consideration some of those outside labs. And that's relatively new for us. But it's something that we just realized we needed to provide, because for some of you it feels overwhelming to have all this information at home and not be able to use it here. So those are the three. So first, obviously, the blood draw, and then or the $299 initial consult, which doesn't require that initial panel. Now that doesn't mean that Dr. Zach or Dr. Loy might still not include that. Depends on what the blood work you have looks like, how comprehensive it is, and so on. So you either start with the $449 or the $299. Pediatric, we don't start with a blood panel. We start with a $199 initial consult, which is basically a conversation.
And you said labs had to be within, blood work had
6
to be
months
within
for
6
anything
months.
non-blood.
Okay.
So people do have, some people have food testing, some people have hormone testing from urine and different things like that. Blood is 90 days. Blood is volatile enough that anything much older than that is too old. It just wouldn't be relevant. Any other specific questions?
Is that something like MRIs and
Yeah,
CAT
sure.
scans?
Yeah,
I mean, just
we
get
can
all
put-
that stuff.
yeah, all of that stuff. Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it's up to them, not me, to decide what's useful and what's not. In some cases, an MRI isn't, and in some cases, it is very relevant, depending on what's going on.
And then how do you test? Like, for someone, let's say with cancer, how do you know your cancer tumors are getting smaller? Do you just keep on doing blood tests?
Yes. Now, I this is where I am obligated to tell you I'm not a nurse, not a doctor, but I went on TV. I know a lot from being here and from experiencing it myself. We do have cancer-related testing that actually identifies cancers and precancerous cells in very, very, very small numbers. So some of you that are either familiar with cancer, have survived cancer, or even have cancer right now. So Dr. Roy uses cancer as a verb, calls it cancering. And basically everybody is cancering all the time. It's when that goes out of control that cancer starts winning. So we have tests that we use that identify those cells in very, very small numbers. And essentially the idea is you catch it while you can still do something about it. And then some of the other things are just more for them to say, I would say. But we have people that come here because they don't want that cancer to come back. And we have people that come here because they have very recent cancer diagnoses, or we have people come here because their family history is filled with it. And I think the other thing that's important to understand is our family history does affect us. Our genetics do affect us, but they don't necessarily create the doom that everybody says. Correct. Great. I'm glad you said that, because that's not super PC. But the epigenetic factors affect how those genes behave. And when you affect those epigenetic factors, they just play nice. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Beyond that, you'll see obviously restoration, promotion, support. There are patients who become well and will say, you know, I kind of like it here. I'd like to make sure that I don't go back to my old habits. I'd like to stay well. somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but it also makes sense. I call the restorative care plans, or those other care plans, I call them the get out of trouble plans, and then we have the stay out of trouble plans. So when the time is right and when you are back on the road to wellness, then we can have a dialogue with you about what that looks like and how you can stay connected with this place. Some people will we essentially replace their primary care practitioner. One thing it's important to say, and I don't know if it's relevant to any of you at all, but just so you know, HSA and flex spending, the most common ways people pay for care. So that's, I know no one, and I've been here a while and talked to a lot of people, I know no one that's actually used that money for care and then been audited and had to pay back. You still have to consult your plan, disclosure, but in my experience, it hasn't happened. The other thing is, how many of you are familiar with medical cost sharing plans? So CHM, Samaritans, MediShare. We do have a pretty high percentage, I would say higher percentage here than in reactive care clinics, of patients with those plans, and those patients successfully get money back routinely. Anything else on money? Okay. Some summary slides, and then we can walk around and answer questions, and however we can best help you can get some more food. How was it, by the way? Pretty good? Yeah, it's interesting. We have a page up here. It's a restaurant recommendations for Des Moines, and I recognize that sometimes it's Mother's Day or a birthday, or heck, you just don't feel like cooking. Somebody just wants to be nice to whoever. A lot of guys cook these days too. And everybody's sort of like, where do we go? And we're not trying to say here that everything on all these menus is healthy. But what we are saying is that there are places where you can make better choices than others. And so that's really what this list represents. And Biaggi's is a surprising choice, because you drive by an Italian restaurant, right. Well, interestingly, the man being the chef partner there has a brother with celiac and does a phenomenal job for us at events, creating meals, appetizer all the way to dessert, with no gluten, dairy, or soy, and delicious. And they actually have a pretty robust gluten-free menu and can make your food free of dairy quite easily there too. So, good news, shameless pitch, they don't pay me. I just think it's surprising, and I love that place. My kids love it, so it's nice. All right, functional medicine, just a few reminders before I stop talking. It's a science-based field of healthcare, and a few principles that I want you to remember. We are all biochemically individual. So what's normal for you is not necessarily the same as my normal. This idea of normal lab ranges and the cholesterol number that everybody should be shooting for, it just doesn't make sense, because we are all unique and different. Very much focused on patient versus disease-centered care. So you are not your disease. You are not your diagnosis, and we're going to talk to you about all kinds of things. Stress in your relationships, how much you sleep, stress in your job. And health here is viewed as not just the absence of symptoms, but positive vitality. I am not only free of symptoms, I am not only free of a diagnosis, but I am I'm rewriting my medical future. Which for some of you feels like, okay, let's just start with not feeling so crummy. And I get that. But the goal here ultimately is also very different. So that's who we are, what we do, how we do it. What questions do you still have? Or how can I help? Yes,
So
ma'am.
this is kind of rhetorical,
Sorry.
okay? You've kind of gone through some of this already. So I've been struggling with something for a really long time. I went to Mayo just this past spring. I got a diagnosis, but no help. I mean, So, and I've done a lot of natural clinics. I've done a lot of, you name it, I've probably done it. And I have gotten no help. So why would I come to you?
Yeah, I get that question a lot, and I can only answer it based on my frame of reference, right? So in this community, because we're one of the few clinics that only does this, I can say with certainty that we are experts at this. So there's really nothing we haven't seen. When people raise their hand and say, what about, that guy that I met with the thing that had 37 letters, That's a rare situation. So there is so much experience. So for Dr. Zach, in functional medicine specifically, it's all he's ever done. And Dr. Lori, for 15 years, was a DO and practiced within the Unity Point Network, specifically in Norwalk. So she brings this dynamic of, I understand prescription meds. Now he does too, but in a different way. And together, I've consistently said, together it is an amazing, amazing thing. And they consult on cases frequently, and I have heard them say equally, like I've heard her say, how did he know that? Because, I mean, to a lot of people, it'd be like, well, she's the one that has it. She's the DO, right? But remember, 15 years of experience, hundreds of new patients on an annual basis. So they've seen it all. And so whether it is science, whether it's intuition, whether it's a combination of both, the lens through which we see things is different. Now, the other thing I think is really important is if you've been everywhere, but people have been limited in whatever way. So if they couldn't draw blood because they were not the kind of care provider that draws blood, then they're still practicing symptom-based care. If they are still filing insurance, they're limited to the testing they can recommend because they can only recommend what's going to be paid for by insurance. So even if you've seen a lot of people, very seldom have people been to a place like this. It's all we do. We have two providers with very different backgrounds, and we can order whatever the heck we want. Because in advance, you know what that's going to look like. We're going to tell you how much it's going to cost, but we're also going to get you the information that you need that for whatever reason others have not had access to. That's my answer. There's probably other angles, there are other things that people could say. There's no magic, just a lot of hard work, a lot of science, and a lot of experience. And a lot of people. And resources. I don't know any other functional medicine office, even in town, that has IV therapy as an example. We're the only one. There's Iowa IV, but it's not a functional medicine office. Who are you thinking
No,
of?
not at all.
I thought you were saying, no, you're not right.
No,
I was like, oh
no,
gosh.
you are right. No,
Okay.
It's like
Whew.
to find.
Because that was
I've
said
even
pretty
seen
firmly.
this.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. Yes.
You can't get them.
That's what our nurses do all day. They're chasing after the sterile water and chasing after the vitamin C supplies, and yeah, it's something. I'm glad I don't do that part. But they don't want to do this, so it's perfect. What else?
So in your announcement on Facebook,
Yes.
you also talked about like a subscription.
I did. So that's that stuff. And you're probably the only one that would have that question, and there's a logical reason why you would, and so I can talk to you about that separately.
Okay.
But her question is specifically about what happens after. There's a restorative care plan, a foundational care plan, an initial consult, a pediatric plan. If I want to stay, if I want to be a part of this clinic beyond that, what is it? And so that's what you're talking about. And I'm happy. Readiness is important, and I don't know if I want to give a ton of information about something that's going to happen 9 or 10 months from now for a lot of people.
I used to come here,
Yeah.
and it completely helped me in my journey.
Yeah.
And I kind of fell off the wagon, and now I'm back.
Thank you for adding that part.
Yeah.
All right, here's what happens next. There's still more food. You are free to walk around. There are people still here that are happy to answer your questions. I can be a little tour guide for a second, but then usually people do have questions for me. And I'm happy to answer those questions if they feel like more private questions and you're not as comfortable sharing those in front of everyone. I can certainly appreciate that. You are free to go wherever you'd like to go. Don't open a door and don't open a file. Those are the only rules. But beyond that, we have no secrets, and we have lots of people happy to help. So thank you so much for coming.